Good news on the injury front for the Buccaneers' key players. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listener view every day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at @JYarcho_Bucs, credentialed member of the media covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers, here with you 5 days a week along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways you can support the show is become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, general thoughts, one-on-one conversations with me via text message. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes to become an insider today. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Football season is around the corner. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bets now. The practice squad has been filled up, and Todd Bowles addresses the fast starts they've had under his leadership, as well as the thoughts of some experts. That's all coming up in a little bit. I want to start this one off with some good news that was announced shortly after Evan and I were done recording, and that is that wide receiver Chris Godwin and offensive tackle Tristan Wirfs both passed their physicals. That is huge for the Bucs, as well as those two individually to get to where they want to be, which is, of course, on the field. We talked about it last week when it was announced that neither player would be on the PUP list to start the season. And the reasoning behind that was neither could practice with the team until after they come off that list. So if they can't be activated until week 5, that PUP list is a minimum of 4 games, then you have multiple weeks of practice before they're ready to take the field. And at that point, you're going to be missing them for about half the season. Instead, being on the active roster, they could start practicing as soon as they were cleared. Todd Bowles was on WDAE with T. Kraz on Wednesday and was asked about Godwin's timetable. And Bowles said, and I'm paraphrasing here, I don't have the exact quote, but basically that it would be sooner than later. And he leaned more towards the sooner side than the later side of things. And then T. Kraz followed up, as he should, to try to coax a little firmer timeline out of him, and Bowles, in typical Bowles fashion, was not buying it, and he wouldn't commit to anything. He basically said it could be week 2, it could be week 5. Now, my gut feeling, if he passed his physical and he starts practicing with the team next week, he's going to be back in week 4 against the Eagles. That seems like a solid timeline to me. That gives him 4 full weeks of practice on top of whatever other physical therapy and rehab that he's doing, and we could see him suit up for that week 4 game. How much he would play is a completely different story and discussion. If I'm Bowles, I'm probably limiting him to a less than 50% snap count, probably even closer to like 25 to 30%. I'm using him on third downs. I'm using him in red zone. I'm not sending him onto the field for a first down run play for my own 25-yard line. I would be very, very selective, and I think the Bucs are going to be very selective in how they use him up until the time he starts looking more like himself and can really start to take on a bigger workload, which is why I feel the exact opposite way about Tristan Wirfs. So Wirfs, I feel you need to be more cautious and keep him out maybe even an extra week beyond when he says he feels good enough to go. I wouldn't expect him before week 5 against Seattle at the absolute earliest. You can't put a snap count on a left tackle. You can't ease him in certain packages or situations. Once he's on the field, he's on the field. That's it. He's taking every snap, barring some kind of injury, which is exactly what you want to avoid. We talk so much about the chemistry that the offensive line needs. So you don't want to be swapping guys in and out throughout a drive or throughout a game just to get one player reacclimated to regular season play. Let's be honest. We of course, we all hope that Charlie Heck performs well, protects Baker, opens up run lanes, but we also know how much better the offensive line will be once Wirfs is back on the field. You also have to remember what kind of competitor Wirfs is and how much he's going to want to get back out there. This may be a situation where you have to protect Wirfs from himself in order to make sure that he doesn't suffer a setback or re-injures that surgically repaired knee. So when he says, yeah, I feel good enough to go out there, it may not be popular, but it may be the right thing to do to tell him that's great, but sit out one more week. Let's make sure. I would rather that he come back as healthy as humanly possible a week later than he could have, than trying to speed up the process and have him go out there when he feels he's ready and it turns out to be just a little bit too early and he gets himself taken off the field again for an even longer period of time. These two guys are so vital to what the Bucs want to do offensively that, when they return, you need it to be for the long haul. You need it to be for the rest of the season. And it sucks that they lost Jalen McMillan because it makes working Godwin in slowly a little bit more difficult than we originally anticipated when we were talking about this throughout the offseason. But you still have Evans and Ibuka, Bucky, Rashad, Tez, Shep, Ryan Miller. They're all in the fold as pass catching threats. And if the Bucs hadn't drafted Ibuka, I would be far more concerned than I am right now. And even if they work Godwin back slowly and only in certain situations, you also have to think that any Godwin is better than no Godwin. As for Wirfs, I would think that the Bucs are going to try to mitigate as much risk as possible with Charlie Heck out on the field. I'll get into the Cade Otton stuff in a little bit, but it's not going to surprise me if we see Coke Kieft out there on the left side of the line, maybe even Devin Culp lining up out there to help block those edge rushers, give Heck a little bit of an assist out there, picking up blitzes and things like that. It also won't surprise me if we don't see very many slow developing plays that allows Baker to take deep shots. And instead we get a lot of short to intermediate routes so that he can get the ball out of his hands faster and then rely on his pass catchers to get those yards after catch and make some plays with their legs. Sticking with that kind of an attack is not going to be easy because if the defense knows that you're not going to air it out, they can be more aggressive. And that's when you start to see the potential for turnovers increase. You start to see them reading the plays a little bit easier, a little bit quicker. They can bring more pressure because they know that their secondary doesn't have to hold up as long. So you may still see a couple throughout games just to keep the defense honest. But primarily, I don't think it'll be like it was last year with a full, healthy array of pass catchers. On the flip side, you could see the offense go with a death by 1,000 paper cuts approach where they keep these passes to 5 or 6 yards and slowly work their way down the field. You pick up a lot of first downs, you eat a ton of clock, and then you keep your defense well rested. If that approach works, and all of a sudden you have a 16-play drive or a 14-play drive that chews up 6.5, 7 minutes of clock, and then your defense gets a quick 3 and out or a takeaway. Now you're going back on the field against a tired defense early in the game. You continue to wear them out, and then all of a sudden things start to open up. The edge rushers, the blitzers, they're not getting there as quickly. You have time to let those slow developing plays develop a little bit more. You can start taking your shots. The defenders are going to be a half step slower, and that's when things open up for Bucky Irving. So it's a double-edged sword where the defense could take advantage of that situation and really make your offense pay for not having these deep routes, or you're really going to wear them out and you're going to be able to run things up pretty quick. So while the initial prognosis was that both players were likely to still be out until October, it sounds like Godwin could potentially return a little bit sooner, and we'll see another layer added to the offense once he returns. Then by the time McMillan is back, Godwin should be looking more like his old self. Things can really start to take off just in time to start to make that run towards the postseason. The Bucs don't have any more practices this week. I'm definitely going to be keeping my eyes and ears out for when Godwin ramps up to start practicing, as well as some of these other guys that we're waiting to see come back from injury. Morrison, Izzy, and Otton, Tyke, Tucker, Nelson. All those guys missed practice this week. So something to keep an eye on when they resume things ahead of their week 1 matchup with the Falcons. That's right. We are going to be ramping up to a week 1 matchup all next week. Todd Bowles sounds off about outside expectations and fast starts. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This episode is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. The NFL season is right around the corner, and you can feel the buzz. Fantasy football season is here. Everyone's researching, drafting, building their championship squads. If you haven't joined a league yet, now is the time, and it's all happening on Yahoo Fantasy. This year, I am playing fantasy football on Yahoo Fantasy, and you should too, whether you're a first-timer or a veteran creating your millionth league. My draft is this weekend, and I cannot wait. With season kickoff on September 4th, now is the time to start playing Yahoo Fantasy Football, which offers so many fun ways to compete. You want more ways to play? Try the brand new Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine League mode, where the lowest scoring team gets eliminated weekly until one team is left standing. If you want to play instantly with friends, try the new Draft with Friends mode. Prefer the classics? Get your crew together, go head-to-head in a private league. No crew, no problem. Join a public league. It's the easiest way to play. The NFL season kicks off September 4th, so don't wait. Start your league now. Draft now at yahoofantasy.com/lockedonnfl. That's yahoofantasy.com/lockedonnfl. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listener view every day. We have an important request. Locked On wants to hear from you. We've put together a survey to learn more about our listeners and make your favorite podcast even better. This is your chance to tell us what you like, what you don't like, and answer questions about our advertising. Go to lockedonpodcast.com/survey to get started. Everyone who completes a survey will be entered for a chance to win one of 10 $100 Amazon gift cards. Again, it's lockedonpodcast.com/survey. You can also find the link in the show notes. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can scan the QR code that is up on your screen right now. We want to thank you all so much for helping us out and trying to make these shows as absolutely the best they can possibly be. All right, Todd Bowles had some interesting moments when speaking to the media on Wednesday, and I got to say, I liked some of the moxie we got from him. I'm going to start with the outside expectations, because if there's one thing that we know about this team and this organization, it's that they love when people count them out or don't believe in them. However, that doesn't seem to be the consensus this time around. Most people, most experts, most outlets are picking the Bucs to win the NFC South for the 5th consecutive season and make their 6th straight playoff appearance. Bowles was asked what he thought about so many people listing them as the favorite in the division, and he said, quote, "We didn't pay any mind when they picked us to come in last. We're not going to pay any mind when they pick us to come in first," end quote. Yes, Todd. That is outstanding. Look, too many times players and coaches and people in these organizations and these locker rooms, they start to read their own press clippings. They get a little high on themselves. They start thinking their poop don't stink. So you think that after numerous years of being overlooked or ignored or insulted or disrespected, that this team would maybe, puff their chest out a little bit when they actually get shown some respect. Nope. They don't care. Teams adopt and emulate the personality of their head coach. It happens across the league with every team. Why do you think that when Sean Payton was in New Orleans, all of their players were insufferable jerks? Why during the Belichick era of New England did it feel like you couldn't get more than 2 words out of any of their players during media scrums and interviews and post-game press conferences? Under McVay, the Rams have a little bit of cockiness, a little bit of swagger to them. They're a fun team. But for the Bucs, they take their cue from Todd. They're fun, but they're humble and they're reserved. Well, they're mostly reserved because I think it's impossible for Baker to not have that swag and that gravitating personality that he has. But by and large, the team speaks with their actions. And even Baker, you go back to his early days with Cleveland, and I'm sure going to Carolina and then being released and ending up with LA, part of that process humbled him a little bit. But he's a lot more reserved with Tampa than he was with Cleveland. Doesn't mean he's any less fun, doesn't mean he's any less entertaining or doesn't show that swag and that brashness at times. But this team is we're not going to talk. We're not going to boast. We're going to go out there and we're going to let our play speak for itself. Having Bowles come out and basically flat out say that we didn't care then, we don't care now, it's huge. And, this team knows that they have to go out and earn it. They know that expert opinions are meaningless and stupid because the season isn't played on paper or with predictions or with projections. It's played on a field between two teams. So they don't care that these people that picked them to finish last year or the year before, all of a sudden have changed their minds. They're saying, oh, they're going to finish first. No, they didn't care about your opinion when you didn't like them. They're not going to care about your opinion when you do like them. So I heard that, and I just couldn't stop laughing because it was just the perfect response from Todd Bowles. But the other thing that jumped out was the hot starts that the team has gotten off to under Todd Bowles. Since he took over in 2022, the Bucs have started off 2-0 every season. We could even go so far as to say they started 2-2, then 3-1, then 3-1. It's always after that first month when they've run into some real problems and had to rally and string together a lot of wins late in the season. But 2-0 3 straight years is a solid way to start off your seasons. Of course, this year, they're going to play those first 2 games without some of their key players. But Bowles was asked about the hot starts and said, quote, I think each year is different, especially this year, because we haven't played yet. But, we got off to good starts just from preparation and understanding and trying to let the guys play fast. It all worked out at the end of training camp. We came together at the right time to start the season. Everybody understands how the start of the season goes. And, we've got some veterans leading us there, and we've just been fortunate to win the first couple of years, end quote. Those last 3 seasons, there were some snaps taken by everyone in the starting lineups, which is not something that we saw this year. You guys know I'm a little concerned about that. Baker, Evans, Levante, Antoine, those guys weren't on the field during preseason. And this year, you're starting off with back-to-back road games, with one of them being a division rival that swept you last year. The other one is a very, very talented and difficult defense in primetime. So they started off with back-to-back road games against the Cowboys and Saints in 2022. They won those games 19-3 and 20-10 before losing back-to-back home games to the Packers and the Chiefs. But it certainly isn't going to be easy for this team to go into Atlanta and go into Houston and win both of those games. I think what Todd did here was honest, but it was also setting the stage. Yes, every year is different. Every team is different. So all you could do, Greg Allman put out on Twitter yesterday, on Tuesday, there are 17 players that were on the Bucs roster last year that are not on the Bucs roster this year. Now, a couple of them came back on the practice squad, but that's a big change. You're talking about 36 out of 53 players were part of that 2-0 start last year. So, all you can do is put in the work to prepare yourself for that particular game and then let the chips fall where they may. You have to turn preparation into execution, and they've done a good job of that with Bowles as the head coach. But division games are always tough. Records get thrown out the window because the two teams know each other so well. Road primetime games have not been the Bucs' friend over the last few years. I mean, to be completely honest, regular season primetime games in general have not been the Bucs' friend over the past couple of years. So Bowles is basically telling everyone that they're going to put in the work. They're going to do what they need to do. They trust their veteran leadership, but the past results are not indicative of future results. So just because they've gotten off to hot starts the first 3 years of Todd Bowles' head coaching tenure doesn't mean that it's going to happen this time around as well. All they can do is prepare the way that they have and then go out and play the games. Another starter is in danger of missing that week 1 game against Atlanta, and the practice squad is set. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. NFL season is almost here, and FanDuel is making sure you are ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you're going to get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. FanDuel is where I go to place all my parlays, all my futures bets, all my prop bets, all my weekly spread bets, my over-under, everything. It always makes every game more exciting. The best part is it's quick, it's easy, and it is the most user-friendly way to add a little spice to your football Sunday. Right now, the Buccaneers are minus 160 to make the playoffs, minus 105 to win the NFC South, and plus 2,700 to win the Super Bowl. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Wrapping things up here on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. I mentioned Cade Otton a little bit earlier, and yes, he missed practice on Wednesday as he's dealing with a leg injury. Bowles was asked if Otton's absence Wednesday was due to that hamstring that kept him out earlier in training camp, and he said, quote, "No, he's sore. I mean, he's got another leg injury in addition to that, so he'll be out a little bit," end quote. When asked about whether or not the injury will affect the regular season, Bowles said that he wouldn't know until next week. Basically, that doesn't sound good. And I would move forward with the assumption that Cade Otton will miss at least week 1. That's, again, not ideal when you're already down Godwin and McMillan as pass catchers. And then, you're down your left tackle. And now the Bucs' top graded blocking tight end, not according to me, that's according to PFF, he's not going to be there to take some of that pressure off of Baker and off of Charlie Heck. So hopefully it isn't anything more serious than they're letting on, and it's going to be a very short-term issue. But at least in the passing game, you have two really solid pass-catching tight ends in Payne Durham and Devin Culp, and then you have a really solid blocking tight end in Keeft. None of them do both things as well as Otton, so it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out, what kind of personnel they're using, how they're going to integrate these guys into the game plan. But did not love hearing that news about Cade Otton, especially when I was just on the Our Lads podcast, and he asked me who's a veteran that I could see having a breakout season, and I said Cade Otton, especially at the beginning of the year with Godwin and McMillan out. All right, finally, the practice squad is set. The Bucs got through the waiver process mostly unscathed. Wide receiver Trey Palmer was claimed by the Saints, which could have been a potential concern if the Saints had anyone that could throw a football. But here is who the Bucs have signed to their practice squad. Linebacker Nick Jackson, offensive lineman Mike Jordan, wide receiver Garrett Green, cornerback Bryce Hall, offensive lineman Luke Haggard, offensive lineman Ben Scott, offensive lineman Lorenz Metz, offensive lineman Tyler McClellan. Do you see a pattern developing here? Defensive lineman Adam Gotsis, defensive lineman CJ Brewer, defensive lineman Nash Hutmacher, tight end Tanner Towla, quarterback Connor Bazelak, wide receiver Dennis Houston, defensive lineman Jason Jones, who was cut by Baltimore, edge rusher Muhammad Kamara, who was cut by Miami, and safety Jack Henderson, who was cut by Carolina. So, nice to see that Bryce Hall, Nick Jackson, and CJ Brewer are all back on the practice squad. Those are all guys that I had making the 53-man roster. Evan had 2 of the 3 making the 53-man roster. I love that they're back on the practice squad, and I don't think that it's going to be very long before those guys are getting game day elevation or promotions to the active roster. I also really like that they have 5 offensive linemen on the practice squad. Some of those guys will for sure have game day elevations, especially early in the year while Tristan is still out. Remember, they only carried 8 offensive linemen, including Tristan Wirfs, on the 53-man roster. So they really loaded up with offensive linemen on the practice squad, which I think is a absolutely phenomenal idea. The biggest surprise to me is that Tyreek Funderburk did not get a call back to be on the practice squad. I kind of figured he would have been a lock to come back, considering how he played down the stretch last year. It was rough in the beginning, but as we got later into the season, he was getting better. I thought he performed well during training camp and during preseason. I think that really probably came down to an injury kind of issue, or maybe they felt that one corner and one safety on the practice squad was enough with all the other corners and safeties that they have on the active roster. You have, what is it? It was 6 corners and 5 safeties on the active roster there. So, I was surprised that Funderburk didn't get brought back, but hopefully, I'm rooting for him to land somewhere, but I'm mostly rooting for him to somehow find his way back to Tampa. And then the new faces the Bucs were able to get from other teams. You have Jason Jones. He's a 6'6", 335-pound defensive lineman. He had a solid preseason for the Ravens. I'm going to reach out to Kevin Ostreicher to see if there's anything interesting that he can tell me about Jones and how he performed throughout training camp in the preseason, give a little insight there. Henderson, the rookie safety, he played for Minnesota last year, had 6 sacks, 9 tackles for loss. And then during his time with Southeastern Louisiana, before he transferred to Minnesota, he had 6 interceptions in his time there. So, pretty solid player there. And then edge rusher Mo Kamara, he won the Mountain West Defensive Player of the Year his last year at Colorado State in 2023, finished with 13 sacks. He ran a 4.57 40 at the combine ahead of the 2024 draft. Basically lost his spot with the Dolphins because of their addition of Matthew Judon. So I wouldn't expect any of these guys to be elevated within the first couple of weeks, but I like the depth that they brought in at a couple of positions that they didn't carry a ton of players on the active roster. I think the addition of Kamara is going to intensify things between Watts and Braswell as far as which of those two is going to keep their spot in the rotation and which one is going to have to try and fend off the advances of Kamara as he gets acclimated to this defense and starts being able to show off some of that size and or some of the speed and strength that he has. Competition breeds excellence. The Bucs opted to bring in those guys over some of the ones that they already had in-house during training camp, during preseason. So that tells you how highly they thought of these players, and I'm going to trust the scouts to continue to do the phenomenal job that they've been doing in finding talent for this Buccaneers roster. That is going to do it for this episode. Please check out everything going on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at @JYarcho_Bucs. Follow on Instagram or TikTok at Locked On Bucs at both of those places. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube with the notifications turned on, as well as wherever you get your podcasts. Become an insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes. If you want to support the show, but you don't want to be an insider, it's real simple. Like this episode on YouTube, leave a 5-star review wherever you get podcasts. It does help other Buccaneers fans find the show. Guys, we're closing in on 10,000 subscribers on YouTube. We are less than 80 away. Last time I checked, let's get to 10,000 before the Bucs and Falcons kickoff in week 1. Can we do that? Can we get enough subscribers to get up to 10,000 before the season officially kicks off? Help us out. Share the show, subscribe, all those things. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. Want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.